Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our meeting from Wine and Palatinate region on socialism and war, Ukraine. Um, so what we are witnessing is that the Russian invasion is still going on. Like there are still civilians murdered and cities shelled, but at the same time there are like in NATO states, in the Western states, more calls for sanctions, for war arms deliveries, the bigger militarization of the Balkan, of the Balticum, and of the Baltic, and or even like a direct intervention of NATO. Like even this is like called for sometimes. And this is all accompanied by threats of nuclear war from both sides. So the question we must put forward is what can we do? How can we build a movement against both imperialisms from below? And our speaker today is Andrzej Zebrowski. He is from the organization Workers' Democracy in Poland. Welcome, Andy. And we will do it, he will be speaking like for 30 to 40 minutes. Afterwards, we will have a discussion, and the event will be ended by some closing remarks of like 5 to 10 minutes. Perfect. I'm Angelo. I'm from Marx 21 Rhine-Palatinate region, and I will be your host today. So enough said, let's jump right into it, and I will pass it on to Andy.
Okay. Right. Look, we all know there's a horrible nightmare going on. I'm speaking from Warsaw, and just over the eastern border, there's a war going on. We've seen massive destruction, thousands of civilians killed. Add to that, thousands of soldiers, Ukrainians, Russians, used as cannon fodder. And we see that this is what the modern situation is. People often say, how can this happen in the 21st century? Well, we're actually seeing what the 21st century under capitalism looks like. Just to stress everything I say in this meeting, because I have to stress this when whenever we have this argument in Poland, that if there's any opposition to NATO, people often say that you are playing into the hands of Putin and you're on Putin's side and this kind of thing. So the first thing I will stress is that there is no justification for Putin's invasion, for the invasion of the Ukraine. There is absolutely no justification. We do not justify it. We understand why this happens, but that's not the same as justifying it. Russia is an imperialist state with nuclear weapons. We don't, like a few people, not that many people, but some people on the left see Russia as an anti-imperialist force, which is basically nonsense. But of course, the criticism of Russia is easy. You just go along with the mainstream media in our countries, especially in Poland. I think in Poland, you have the biggest support for NATO amongst ordinary people in Europe, possibly in the world even. Certainly one of the top countries that where the population supports the NATO. So having said that, I want to move, since we're living in the West, I want to start to look at what the United States and the West are doing in this situation. Because for decades now, we've had a push eastwards from NATO. And since I'm speaking to a German audience, that we know that when there was German unification, that reunification, that there were assurances given that NATO would not push towards the east. This has clearly been broken. In fact, as soon as Poland, as was then Czechoslovakia and Hungary joined NATO, 12 days later, there was a bombing attack on Serbia by NATO. So immediately countries are pulled into supporting imperialist attacks as soon as they joined the alliance. Very early on after the big invasion, after February, the United States, Barack Obama's CIA chief, Leon Panetta, said, it's a proxy war with Russia, whether we say so or not. Now, obviously, a lot of times, you know, different politicians say different things, but he's clearly outlined how the United States see it. It's a great opportunity for the West and headed by the United States to weaken a rival, an imperialist rival. And of course, the United States is a far, far more powerful imperialist state than Russia. Plus, if you add in all the Western states that are allied to the United States, it's an unbelievably massive military machine, NATO and the alliances the United States has. So on one estimate, we have from January to October, we've had $52 billion of aid, including military aid. About half of that is military aid from the United States alone. This doesn't include what other states are giving to Ukraine. I remember there was and this is from the SIPRI, the Swedish International Peace Research Institute, quite respected organization, says it's even slightly more than that. In May, they already said it was 53 billion. So the scale of this intervention is not simply that somebody's sending a few guns or, you know, a few arms, a couple of tanks or something like that. This is a massive intervention on the part of the West. I remember a debate in London. There was a big conference in London in July, Marxism conference, where there was a debate where Gilbert Ashkar, a Marxist, was claiming that Russia also supported Vietnam, and even I think he said that Russia supported Vietnam to a greater extent. Well, this is simply not the case. The American aid to Ukraine that I've just outlined is on a much higher level. The Russian arms expenditure, I think, from last year was around 60-something billion. So you can see that it almost matches the aid, including humanitarian aid, almost matches the Russian aid, the Russian military expenditure. So you're talking about a real clash of imperialisms here. You're talking about the US using the Ukrainians as a proxy, which is why you can call it a proxy war, as Panetta did. And the question therefore is, okay, so why is the West doing this? Because apologists for capitalism always say, well, capitalists just want to trade. They want to produce and then trade their products between different countries. And they say that it's not in their interest to really be aggressively military. The other argument is, of course, that the United States is defending freedom and democracy and progressive rights, for people all over the world, and the West is doing that alongside the United States. But this obviously doesn't hold any water. If you look for even on just in this millennium, the states that are involved in NATO have killed hundreds of thousands of people, really hundreds of thousands of people in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, where there's been a return to massive human trafficking and slavery, incredible use of violence to pursue those states' interests. So really we're seeing a clash of imperialisms. Right now, you've got hundreds of thousands of NATO troops on NATO's eastern flank. You've seen Russia doubling or more than doubling the amount of troops that it's sending into the Ukraine war. And it looks like it's going to go on for a long time. In fact, you know, the Washington Post, I was reading this thing from October, I think, that the United States officials say neither Russia nor Ukraine is capable of winning the war outright. And they think it's just going to carry on. I think that's actually can be quite accurate, unfortunately, for the people who live in Ukraine. So it's worth asking a question, why are they doing this? And in order to answer that question, you have to look at the nature of capitalism, which inbuilt into capitalism is imperialism. That's what Lenin called 100 years ago, called the division and the redivision of the world. You divide the world and then there's more competition, you redivide the world. It used to be colonies. Today, it's not colonies, it's economic military competition. Often people say these wars are caused by this kind of narrow interests of certain capitalists in, let's say, the United States, arms manufacturers. This is not a good analysis. These planners look at the whole world in the words of Zbigniew Brzezinski, an old advisor to President Carter, who was actually a kind of mentor to lots of State Department officials today. He wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard. And of course, the pawns in this chessboard are ordinary people. And his analysis, you know, basically he's looking at the whole world. He talks about Eurasia, Europe and Asia as one landmass. And he says that without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. Okay, so that sounds a bit anti-imperialist, but what that means is that America wants to fill that space. It says that Ukraine is an important space on the Eurasian chessboard. It's the critical state out of the key Eurasian geopolitical pivots of all these flashpoints in Eurasia. Ukraine is key. That's how they see it. All the talk about democracy and all the rest of it, that's for the mass media. But the real politics is about who wins in the imperialist rivalry. Imperialism is a fusion of geopolitical competition and economic competition. It's not a foreign policy choice. It's not just, all right, oh gosh, why don't we vote for the president not to be imperialist? And then he won't be imperialist, the president of the United States. Imperialism, just like monopoly capitalism, just like from competition you get monopolies, you get ever bigger units of capitalism, you get ever more powerful or more widespread arms production, and more countries getting deadly arms and becoming competitive militarily on a world scale. Just all of these things are part of capitalist competition. Capitalist competition was never just economics in a marketplace. It always was accompanied by violence from the very beginning. So that's important to understand. So if you really want to be against imperialism, you have to be against capitalism. If you want to be consistent in being against war and for people to live in peace. Right. The other thing I want to add is, all right, I've talked about the West and Russia, but also the Ukrainian government, because just as somebody said before the meeting, you know, Ukrainians aren't all one block. Of course, you know, at the moment, people are horrified by the invasion and want the end to the invasion, as I think do we. We also argue for NATO to not be involved in the war. But the Ukrainian government is not the Ukrainian people. It's a tragedy that for years, the Ukrainian governments have been arguing, not just arguing, have been pursuing a politics of tying themselves to NATO. And this was, and people were told that this would make them more safe. That would make, this is what they say in countries like Poland, by the way, as well, all the time. I'm sure they say that in other countries, but in Poland, as I said, it's a very popular message that Ukraine, what's interesting, but if you look back in 2008, there was only 20% support for NATO in the Ukraine. Okay, so that's 14 years ago, 20% support. Even in 2019, according to the left-wing sociologist Volodymyr Ishchenko, he says that the support for NATO in 2019, when NATO membership was put into the Ukrainian constitution, that support was 40%. So it's still not a massive support for joining NATO. Now that's very interesting. Obviously, the situation of the war will have changed all that, but it just shows that it was not an inevitable policy that you have to attach yourself to NATO as the Ukrainian government. It is if you're representing the interests of Ukrainian capitalists. Don't forget that Ukraine, of the so-called post-communist countries, had one of the worst, if not the worst, records. Even as late as 2019, its GDP was lower than in 1989. Now, of course, it's collapsing, but in 1919, and the figures I have, then it was 30 years of market reforms, of billionaire oligarchs looting the country, meant that its GDP was lower than in 1989. The population, I used to say, oh yeah, Ukraine's got 50 million people. Of course, it hasn't got 50 million people. And I don't just mean because people have become refugees right now, but the Ukraine, the population fell by 10 million from the level in 1993, just till a couple of years ago. So you've got a massive early low life expectancy as well, just 67 for men and 71, 72 for the general population. So the country has been ravaged already by capitalism, and the solution was to even more put it under the dominance of Western capitalists who, as we can see around the world, want to squeeze as much as they can in order to increase their profits. Okay, so that's that situation. And again, I want to stress this argument about, because I find that people find it the most difficult to say that opposition to NATO is not support for Putin. And I like this kind of analogy. If you had, for instance, NATO planes over Ukraine, and they shot down some Russian planes, and let's say Russia used nuclear weapons. As somebody pointed out, the West is quite capable of using nuclear weapons today as well as what it's done in the past. But let's say that Russia, would we praise or condemn Russia for doing that? Of course, we would condemn Russia for doing it. But would we say that the West had nothing to do with it when it was flying planes over Ukraine? Of course we wouldn't. Which is why at the beginning of the war, from the beginning of the war onwards, they've refused to use NATO troops, NATO pilots over the Ukrainian territory, because they realize what it could spark off. So in the same way, 30 years of NATO expansion, 30 years of pushing in rivalry is also heating up the atmosphere, is also making the conflict much, much worse with every year. Hang on a minute, I've just lost the video. Okay, it's back again. Okay. Another argument I want to deal with is that people talk about the democratic right to join NATO as if it's like a simple democratic right to that you would have a referendum over in any country. But I think in the case of NATO, NATO is nothing to do with democracy. NATO is a huge war machine. It's not about democracy. NATO has nothing to do with democracy. It's about using naked military force or the threat of that to get what you want, in the interests of the most powerful people in the world. So the argument really is that we should be opposed to the politics of joining NATO, as we are in Poland. We're for NATO to be abolished. We don't have any kind of weakness when it comes to the argument that NATO is a supporter defender of people who have joined NATO, and that's an extremely important point, because yeah, it's often these war situations are often posed in the terms of human rights and democratic rights, whereas really they're a trampling of those rights. They're really all about who can win in terms of the military and economic competition, with ordinary people suffering. Right, coming to Poland now, the situation in Parliament, I think, looks different to the situation in some countries, at least, where the whole political spectrum is supporting NATO, from the right wing right through to the new left party Razem, which is part of a coalition. Razem means together. That was a kind of left social democratic hope. They've supported NATO, they've supported increased arms, not just sending to Ukraine, but also increasing the armaments in Poland. there's a massive stepping up of militarization in Poland. Only today they've received new tanks from South Korea that they've bought from South Korea. Poland used to have 2%, used to be proud of being one of the few countries that had gone over 2%, that NATO wanted 2% of GDP in spending on armaments. Now the new plan is for over 4%. It's massive, massive increase at a time when there's huge inflation, when people are really suffering, when the health service is completely in a shambles, when the education system is bad. All this is going on, but they have billions and billions to spend on arms. And they say this makes people safe, this makes people secure. And a recent event showed that this was nonsense. In February, what am I talking about? Mid-November, 2 Polish people were killed, agricultural workers, people working on a farm. They were killed by what turned out to be a Ukrainian rocket, Ukrainian missile. Okay, that's 2 people. In Ukraine, thousands of people have died. It's not to say that that's an equivalent or something like that. What it means is, what's the importance of it is this, that they're saying that all this extra spending is making people more secure, and we've just seen how secure people are. For a while, it made news all around the world. I'm sure you saw it over in Germany, where people were wondering, is this, you know, the first reports from Associated Press say it was a Russian missile. Then there was a thing, well, does this mean there's going to be a NATO-Russia confrontation? The Polish government found out, but didn't want to say anything for hours because they didn't know how to present it. And actually, Joe Biden was first in saying it came from Ukraine, even before the Polish government, and eventually they said it. So that's an important point to make, I think, that NATO does not, far from bringing security to the people who have NATO, it pulls you into different wars, it makes you a target. The other argument is that because of the war atmosphere, that you can say that, you know, workers who start fighting are being not only hitting at their own societies, which is always the nonsense that that capitalists and their governments always say, but that they're helping Putin. You've already seen, I think the conservative chairman said just a day or two ago, very recently, that it's the wrong time to strike for nurses in the health service in Britain, striking over low pay, because it would help Vladimir Putin. And we haven't, because the level of strikes isn't so high in Poland at the moment, I could easily expect the same arguments in Poland. But what we have had is, what's interesting, there's trade union solidarity, which people remember from history, a great movement in 1980-81. Today, that's still a union, but it's a union that is very linked, very much linked to the right-wing government. And it's been, although there are local strikes with members of this union, the national, it has not been keen on calling any national action. So it was a good news that there was going to be in November a big national strike in Warsaw, where coaches were booked from all over the country. It was going to be thousands of solidarity trade unionists against the government that they were linked to, because the union leaders felt the pressure of workers suffering from the inflation. So after these two people were killed in Poland by the Ukrainian rocket, a day later, which was the day before the demonstration was going to take place, the union leaders called it off because of they already knew that it wasn't a Russian rocket. They already knew that it wasn't a war situation. They used that as an excuse to hold talks with the prime minister in this new situation we have of danger and et cetera, to prevent, to call off the demonstration. That's a really important example, I think, of how it wasn't going to be a general strike, but it was going to be an important demonstration of how this pro-war, pro-armaments, this banging of the drum that we have to pour more and more arms into the war, how that leads to a weakening of workers' action. Also in Poland, the people may know that the Ukrainians, there's been about 7 or even 8 million people crossing the border, but I mean, people go backwards. I know some Ukrainians from here that go backwards and forwards, so that's a little bit exaggerated, but there have been millions of people that have crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland, and and some of them have gone on into other countries like Germany and further west. But there was a very good solidarity with these people from ordinary Polish people, or ordinary people living in Poland, I should say, which is important because Poland had a history of anti-Ukrainian politics. Before the Second World War, the Ukrainians numbered about 6 million, which was out of 30 million or so population. It was the biggest minority. Western Ukraine today was actually part of Poland. And there was repression against these people. Even if you go to Eastern Poland today, you can see like a Catholic church being, just a local Catholic church being built very, very tall, so that it's very huge, so that it dwarfs the Orthodox Ukrainian church, so that it becomes bigger. It's like to show who's dominating. Anyway, so what's good about that was, it's very important that there's also, it's important that Ukrainian workers are taken into Polish trade unions, the Ukrainian workers who work in Poland, that kind of solidarity. But of course, the government didn't mind that solidarity, encouraged it, because of the geopolitical situation. But when it came, and also racism plays a part, but when it came to the border with Belarus, where people have been crossing into Poland that have come from Africa, from Syria, from Afghanistan, then they've been pushed back, the famous pushbacks that Frontex, the European Union agency, is famous for, pushing people back into water, pushing people back over borders. So there's been several deaths on the Polish side of the border. We don't know how many, really, because sometimes the bodies have not been discovered. So we are, of course, say, you know, all refugees are welcome, not just Ukrainians. We don't blame the Ukrainians for the situation of the other refugees, but we say that all refugees are welcome. And the Polish government has built a wall between, a new wall between Belarus and Poland. It's built a wall in Kaliningrad, used to be, of course, you will know, Königsberg. There's building a wall right now between the part of Russia, it's an exclave that's bordering Poland. So the atmosphere, and also the government message, is not simply that we're fighting Russia, an old enemy, which is bad enough, that it's, sort of anti-Russian politics all the time, but it's claiming that all Russians are to blame. It wants to bring it down to kind of ethnic politics, which of course you have to fight as an anti-racist, as a socialist, as a human. And we stressing that as well. Okay, so to sum up this first part at least, we live in the West. It's our responsibility to stop the war machine, the war drums on this side of the border. There's no truck to the argument that the West is fighting for some kind of freedom. And we really have to stress the damaging nature of the NATO alliance. I think that the old slogan of we're part of the international socialist tendency, as is Marx 21, I think, that the old slogan that neither Washington nor Moscow applies here, but also the main enemy is at home applies here. Because it's very easy to just say, oh, look at this horrible thing that's going on next door to us or in the next country, isn't put in bad, and just do nothing about what your own government is doing. Whereas the government itself is part of the situation of ordinary Ukrainians at the moment, and of the soldiers who are being massacred every day. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Andy, for your excellent speech. Before we go into the discussion, I will make a few announcements. Yeah, this event is organized by Marx 21 Rhine-Palatinate region. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can also write us an email if you want. And we also have our own YouTube channel where you can find all of our past events, like, for example, the event on the rise of Mussolini or on Americana with Kate Alexander. Also check out our new magazine, like about the disaster of capitalism, where you can also find some articles on Ukraine and also the article on the rise of Mussolini. And here you can also get some books on the topic if you want, an editionaurora.de. Krieg in Osten by Klaus Henning, very much recommended, or on imperialism in general, Imperialismus by Chris Harman. And like for English readers, you can find a part of Klaus' book, Krieg im Osten, also translated in the new issue of International Socialism. Thanks to Richard Donnelly for the translation. Also, we want to announce our next meeting, which is about Iran on the 19th of December, where a comrade who went there, who went there for 3 months, spoke to people who were protesting there, will speak about the revolt and prospects. Yeah, so it's on the 19th of December, 8 p.m. in German. Exactly. And okay, now we will proceed to the discussion. So it's 3 minutes for each contribution or question. There will be a double quota system according to gender or who spoke first. Yeah, exactly. Whoever wants to make a contribution or raise a question, go ahead. All right, so I think I'll kick it off by asking, yeah, how did the situation of or Alicia first?
No, just continue.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I wanted to know if how much did the situation of the rocket hitting of the whole thing around the rockets hitting Poland, like all the propaganda around that. How much did it? Was there some kind of change? Did it have some kind of impact? And if yes, yeah, what do you think exactly? So yeah, I think we will just collect a few contributions, and then Andy can respond if he yeah, if he wants. Exactly. So Alicia.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your contribution. It was very insightful and interesting. I have actually couple questions on the situation in Poland and the region. First, maybe you could give us some more insight on what is the situation on the left. You said already that the parliamentary left is very supportive of the war. Are there basically any differences also between Wiosna, SLD and Razem in their demands towards like how much should the armament grow, or in the criticism of armament expenditure of the government? Are there any differences there? And is there any anti-parliamentarian, is there any relevant anti-parliamentarian left force? Or what are the groups actually who are opposing this kind of politics? I have also questions about like what is your analysis of what is actually Poland's interest? Why do they follow such an aggressive hegemonical policy through this rise of armaments now? And what are like, I'm interested on your thoughts on this. Yeah, and the last question maybe is regarding the Ukrainian missile hitting the two people and the village. I wanted to ask you, because you said that Poland has the Polish population or population in Poland supports NATO and the politics of the government. But at the same time, you said also that there is some kind of anger issue. I mean, people are angry because of the inflation. So I wanted to ask you, how big is this connection in the consciousness of the people to link these two things together? Because I mean, like I started with the missile, Ukrainian missile. So I wanted to ask if this event, in your opinion, didn't cause also some kind of change in the mood of the population, because I noticed a lot of very racist comments in the social media, and also, like, this was my impression, but maybe you have some data on it, that the population is fed off with the war, and like, but basically through this right-wing perspective, using racism and saying like, oh, Ukrainian come now and they're using our resources and we have inflation and so on. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, are there any further contributions? Okay, in this case, okay, maybe Andy, you already want to respond to the one or other question. Exactly.
Okay, your question about the propaganda and how I'm not quite sure what we are asking there. I'm not quite sure how it's influencing workers. Was that it?
Should I repeat exactly? Yeah, also maybe regarding your work too. Yeah, if there was some change, yeah.
Okay, but look, I see Karin's got her hand up. Maybe she could. I prefer if people speak, to be honest, and then come back, because otherwise I'll just be speaking all the time. So maybe.
Okay, then Karin's turn, exactly.
I was very thankful for your speech, because you give us all the arguments we need about, I don't know to translate, revolutionary defeatismus.
Revolutionary defeatism, yeah.
Okay, it's very hard. So it's a little bit complicated. Sorry, and so on. And I think these arguments are very important for us, because it wasn't possible for us to start an anti-war movement, because everyone was so fucking afraid. Yeah? From the liberals, the medias, the rights, about saying we are against this war, because you have to stand on the side with the Ukrainians, you have to be against Putin. So I think it's very helpful for us to see very clear what happened in Egypt, where while COP27, or the football cup in Qatar and stuff like that, because it's a little bit easier for us to make these double standards visible and to win the arguments, because we have very good fights on the university, their occupations, etc., etc. And so I think it's good for us to have people around us with who we can have the discussion about war. Why we say another Washington or Moscow. And I think you was very helpful with all your arguments for us to be active in our countries, and why in our milieu where we can work with. Thanks a lot, Andy. It's always good to hear you.
Ewald, du kannst anfangen.
Ja, könnt ihr mich hören, ja?
Ja.
Ja. Okay, danke. Ich kann nur Deutsch sprechen, bin jetzt nicht so, kann nicht so gut Englisch reden, verstehen vielleicht eher, aber halt nicht reden. Aber vielen Dank für den guten, tollen Vortrag. Ich fand es sehr interessant und wichtig, vor allen Dingen diese eine Formulierung oder dieser eine Punkt wegen der Situation, dass die Inflation und der Krieg irgendwie diese Zusammenhänge, die sind, glaube ich, wirklich sehr wichtig für uns alle. Also, und was das Bewusstsein angeht in der Arbeiterklasse, also auch wie die Linke damit umgeht, ja, also, oder wie die linke Kräfte, außerparlamentarische auch Kräfte damit umgehen, das ist, glaube ich, eine sehr wichtige Frage, habe ich den Eindruck. Und deshalb will ich da auch besonders vielleicht das darauf zuspitzen, weil ich denke, der Kampf, also das ist ja nicht so, dass der Krieg die Inflation allein verursacht hat. Das ist, glaube ich, für viele doch ein Punkt, der leicht erkennbar ist, weil die Preise ja schon vorher nach oben gingen und weil diese Situation mit Produktionsverlagerung ins Ausland, in Deutschland ist das ein Thema, ich weiß nicht in Polen, aber diese Unterschiede zwischen in den Lohn und Gehältern, ich weiß, der ist riesig und der führt natürlich dazu, dass es einen Mangel an Arbeitskräften gibt, zum Beispiel in bestimmten Gegenden in Deutschland ist das der Fall, also im ländlichen Raum, aber auch in Facharbeiter werden gesucht, ich bin im Pflegebereich arbeite ich, das ist eine Katastrophe hoch 10. Kinder werden nicht versorgt medizinisch. Es wird jeden Tag oder so wird immer dramatischer. Und das hängt natürlich damit zusammen, dass trotz der, zum Beispiel, dass wir haben auch viele osteuropäische Arbeitskräfte, ohne die überhaupt keine Klinik teilweise funktionieren kann, auch gerade aus Polen, polnische Krankenschwestern und Pflegekräfte. Das ist diese Diskrepanz, die aber wirklich nicht hilft. Also die hilft nicht weiter aus dieser Sackgasse, in dem der Kapitalismus die Mehrheit hineintreibt. Also in Europa, sage ich jetzt mal, auch in Europa. Das sieht man ja gerade in der Ukraine. Ukrainische Arbeitskräfte waren billige Arbeitskräfte, ja, in Polen, ich weiß, aber auch natürlich in Deutschland. Es hat eine lange Geschichte, Zwangsarbeit hier in Deutschland unter den Nazis. Viele sind Flüchtlinge nach Deutschland verschleppt worden oder sind als Zwangsarbeiter hier missbraucht worden unter den Nazis. Und das hat sich diese Ausbeutung der wahre Arbeitskraft hat sich permanent fortgesetzt. Und jetzt kommt der Krieg dazu. Und ich glaube, dass das einfach objektiv eine Chance gibt für unsere Argumente, objektiv gesehen. Subjektiv sind halt die anderen verwirrt, sage ich jetzt mal. Also mag jetzt arrogant klingen, aber weder Washington noch Moskau und der Feind steht im eigenen Land. Da können wir uns, glaube ich, alle, die hier sind und darüber hinaus, ich denke, für Zehntausende, Hunderttausende von Menschen zu sprechen, ja, vielleicht sogar Millionen, die instinktiv vielleicht nicht so ganz bewusst, aber das mit unterschreiben könnten. Nur haben wir jetzt noch nicht die Möglichkeiten, uns so gut zu organisieren. Ja, das ist unsere subjektive Problematik, aber objektiv gesehen geht es schon in unsere Richtung. Allerdings gibt es natürlich auch Rechte und Faschisten. Da wollte ich auch fragen, was er dazu sagen kann, wie die Rechte in Polen damit umgeht. Ich weiß, es gibt auch sehr viele progressive Kräfte. Ich denke zum Beispiel die Frauenbewegung, der letzte Punkt, Frauenbewegung in Polen, weil hier kommt es immer so an, diese Meinung, alles in Polen ist so katholische Kirche, alles erzreaktionär. Das stimmt überhaupt nicht. Es gibt auch andere Kräfte und Beispiel die Frauenbewegung, die ist ja sogar für Deutschland ein Vorbild, würde ich mal jetzt mal fast sagen, ja. Oder nicht fast, sondern sicher sagen, ja. Ja, das war eigentlich der Punkt, das wollte ich nur hervorheben. Danke für den Vortrag und die Beiträge, selbstverständlich. Ganz hervorragend.
Thanks a lot, Ewald. These were quite some questions. So maybe Andy, if you want, you can respond.
Okay, got it. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions. It's quite, yeah, when it comes to the link that I'll start in the order that they were given, I think. How does the propaganda, I think basically people are kind of see Russia as imperialist and don't see the West as imperialist. That's the majority view. So the politicians are strengthening that, all kinds of politicians from the right to the left. They're not just passively reflecting it, they're obviously propagating their views. In fact, they're often the left-wing people I've met are kind of more hostile. The ones who support NATO intervention are more hostile towards what we're saying than an ordinary person who will just listen to the arguments and you can debate the thing with them. It's not so that's often what you find. So like Alica had a whole number of interesting questions. I think that the left, I mean, there's been one or two individuals, and it's not necessarily from the more left, like Razem, like the Young Together party. Sometimes it's an old member of the old post-communist social democracy who says, why are they spending so much on this? But it doesn't get into parliament. you don't hear that in Parliament. I mean, it's almost unanimous, the voting in Parliament. And in that sense, it is really, it helps you understand how 100 years ago, all the social democratic parties who said that Germans would not fight their French brothers and the French would not fight their German brothers, how they collapsed. Because their politics is about using the state. The state is the key agent of change. And if the state is under threat, then you do everything to defend the state. And that's the limitation. Yeah, we support workers fighting, but that's not as important as who's on the top of the state. And with us, of course, it's the opposite. It's useful to be in Parliament, which is, part of the state apparatus, but it's useful to be there because you can announce your politics, but the fight is outside. You're just there as a kind of PR machine in Parliament. You're saying what solidarity people can organize with each other's struggles. Okay, why does Poland want? What's in it for Poland? What's this all about? I think for some time now, Poland has been wanting to be the big guy in Eastern Europe. It wants to dominate. You have the big imperialist powers, and then you have the smaller powers who want to dominate in their regions. And that's basically what they're doing. The arguments really is between the liberals, who tend to be more towards the European Union, and the people like the Law and Justice, the right-wing Law and Justice, more racist Law and Justice, although, doesn't mean the others aren't racist, but the more racist Law and Justice who finance fascists, who actually finance fascists, let's not beat about Bush, they basically want the American link to be the strongest. But in practice, it's not true that the liberals are saying something against the Americans, really. I mean, in practical politics, for US domination of the Western alliance, this war has been a very good thing, because it's brought countries that have different interests and different tendencies, like Germany, for instance. It's brought them under a kind of discipline, a collective discipline, and that's also the case obviously in Poland. So even if you're more towards Europe, I mean, Razem, for instance, let's think it's left-wing to be pro-European Union and have a more military European Union. So great, a more developed European imperialism is supposed to be a solution. Okay, but anyway, so that's just to put it in a nutshell. Poland, like all in capitalism, that's what capitalist competition is about. It's a kind of struggle for dominance, struggle for influence, struggle for filling the spaces, the vacuums that are created. And Poland definitely, the leaders of Poland definitely see themselves as that. Differences, more united. Okay, the extreme right, it's absolutely the case, but it's not loud at the moment. We were talking very briefly about this before the meeting, that the actual fascists, there's fascists in Parliament who are linked to extreme liberals, neoliberals, in a thing called the Confederation or Confederacy. I translate it as Confederacy because when they were formed, they had Confederate flags in the background. So they obviously, identify with that kind of racist symbolism. So they're all racists, whether you're the neoliberal or the fascist. But of course, the fascists are more dangerous. But they merged together to get into Parliament. But they have started this kind of, some of them, and then the rest kind of go along with it. This the fascists, this slogan of "Stop the Ukrainization of Poland." This is supposed to be Poland. How come you can hear Ukrainian language everywhere and all this kind of stuff? We're giving them, you know, how many of the Ukrainians are working? They're getting too much from state support and all this kind of stuff. It's not a big thing yet, but we were saying months ago when this started that this would happen, and it has started. And there are rumblings that you hear sometimes. The odd person will say that it's not an organized force at the moment, and that's really the situation with that. Yeah, Karin's thing about COP27, I think, again, we see any excuse, economic crisis or economic crisis connected to war, and you can forget all about never mind COP20, about climate. You forget about climate, you start reopening coal mines. Okay, we're for non-fossil fuel energy, of course, but this has to wait. And again, you know, it's another excuse to do nothing about climate change. Again, it's a kind of the war is used as an excuse to justify doing nothing over climate change. Yeah, and Evalds, no, you're quite absolutely right that the inflation started before the war. It's not just, you know, the war has all kinds of contributions to economic troubles in different countries, but it's not, you know, it's a capitalist crisis, and the war is kind of part of it. It's not the only thing. That's definitely true. And when it comes to ordinary people, I think that's where you get because if you see imperialism and the clash, it's not just this horrible thing that a horrible guy called Putin has started, and otherwise everything would be more or less okay. If you see it as part of a vicious competition between capitalist powers and that's part of the capitalist system, so then what that means is that it's part of a global competition. It's a global competition for accumulation of capital. It's a global competition, therefore, for exploitation of workers. So if you're against that, then when workers fight, you're on their side and you do everything to make the workers win. When it's a small struggle, but of course, the bigger the struggle, the better. And I think that's got to be our message, because to be really honest with you, we've tried a couple of demonstrations. There's very, very small numbers of people come on just the war message that we want. I mean, it's very easy to go and criticize Putin and have a demonstration outside the Russian embassy, but to have a kind of an anti-imperialist and, you know, to criticize, all right, I don't mind, criticize Putin, but also you have to talk about NATO and what your own state is doing, your own government is doing. That's been very poor. And it's not just because we're lazy or we can't be bothered or whatever. It's actually, it is really difficult to do that. But I think the important thing is, like, for instance, we have a newspaper where we have arguments about the war, but then we have a number of other issues like climate change, but also the fight against inflation, every time workers fight back. And then if people respect you for that, I mean, last week I was talking to a woman who said, oh, this is a little bit going away from the war. It's not about the war, but she was saying that, oh, so you don't like the government, so therefore you support the liberals. I said, no, we don't support the liberals. Well, what do you mean? That's the other side. And that's what, unfortunately, what the polarization is in Poland. It's the liberals or the disgusting peace, the disgusting liberals or the disgusting peace. peace is not peace, but law and justice in Poland, PIS. She said, so what's the alternative? So I pointed to the front page where we have workers fighting, with women workers fighting in Warsaw. I said, that's the direct. She said, yeah, well, that's different then, you know, and I think that's the kind of way that we, even better way of getting. I'm not saying don't campaign against the war and whatever. In different countries, it's a different situation, and we still have to try. But also quite sometimes it's something that's an indirect method can be very powerful, and that applies to climate change as well. I think that you see that the work is the key to change. That's the message. And that means the key to change about climate, the key to not just about fighting inflation. And it's not, all right, it's not a just, it's a huge thing actually. In the fight against inflation, in climate change, but against war itself. That message that workers are the key to change, and against, you know, discrimination and all the rest of it. That's what we have to focus on. But yeah, I mean, behind me, I've got the where we did have a demonstration, but it was, like I say, they're not big. It says Russian troops out of Ukraine, no to NATO escalation. And it talks about Ukrainian and Polish workers uniting, and they'll be invincible if they unite. And that was a few months ago. Yeah, okay, that's for now, or forever. I don't know if you're finishing, whatever.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andy, for answering all the questions until now. So we will start our new round of contributions and questions. What I wanted to the point I wanted to make is like sometimes you also hear this argument like okay, we must ship arms to Ukraine to punish Russia for its invasion, because if we punish Russia for its invasion, no other power will dare to invade another country. Like this is an argument to hear sometimes, but it has like a complete false assumption of like rule-based international order of the rule of international law or something, like as if the invasion in Iraq, for example, didn't happen, which the USA did and devastated like the whole country, or like the occupation of Afghanistan. And what we can see is that they didn't leave Afghanistan, for example, because of like an international law or something, but because they were defeated, because they didn't reach their goals, because it was too costly at the end. And yeah, I think this should also be our perspective, to have like to keep like into mind defeating imperialism, defeating our own imperialism of our own state, which we will face as enemies if or which we face as enemies already, if it is fighting racism, if it is supporting strikes, and so on. And like Zelensky doesn't have anything of this, doesn't support anything of this, because like for example, you can see him like greeting Boris Johnson, hi Boris, or like Ukrainian troops also went to Afghanistan and prevented people from going into planes which were there to evacuate people, and so on. And yeah, like and like, yeah, he says like he loves Israel very much, and so on. So yeah, he's the opposite of like an enemy of imperialism or something like that. Though it is correct to of course, to say Russian troops out of Ukraine, which is, of course, like a war which is fought for capitalist interests of Russia, and yeah, definitely not for denazification or something. Yeah. Exactly. Do you anyone wants to make another contribution? So you can raise your hand if you plan to make one. Karin?
Die Übersetzung ist okay, Andy?
The translation and the so you can switch to DE, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, gut. Dann mache ich es auf Deutsch. Ja. Ich wollte nur verstärken, was du gesagt hast. Ja. Ich glaube, ja, dass wenn wir eben es auch momentan nicht gut zustande bringen, eine kräftige Antikriegsbewegung aufzubauen, so es ist doch eben irgendwie über die Bande gespielt ebenso gut. Das Spannende, das ich erlebt habe, das war einfach die erste wirklich Antikriegsproteste in Wien, hat eben Fridays for Future organisiert. Ja. Und ich konnte damals eben für die Plattform für eine menschliche Asylpolitik, für unser größeres Bündnis eben dort auch sprechen, nach dem Motto Krieg ist Krieg und Mensch ist Mensch, und konnte die Position weder Washington noch Moskau eben natürlich auch sehr gut vertreten dort. Und aktuell gibt es eben die Studierendenproteste, von denen ich erzählt habe, besetzte Hörsäle an der Universität und so. Und es gab einen total schönen Demonstrationsspruch, weil hier ist Universität und Klima immer ganz stark verknüpft. Ja. Es sind sehr junge Leute, die aus der Klimabewegung kommen, die hier aktiv sind. Und einer der beliebtesten Demoslogans war dort am Samstag vor einer Woche zum Beispiel gegen Krieg und Ölkonzerne in der Nähe und der Ferne. Oder eben heute wieder eben auch beim Protest der Uni-Angestellten war der Spruch wieder eigentlich eben auch die ganze Zeit so eben kein Mensch braucht das Bundesheer, gebt das Geld für Bildung her. Und ich finde, das ist einfach eben auch so wirklich eben wahnsinnig wichtig und schön, wie Menschen in der Lage sind, eben in Bewegungen Themen zu verknüpfen, wie wir es hier dann einfach relativ gut schaffen, eben doch eben einfach so diese Klarheit zu haben, Kapitalismus ist scheiße. Ja? Und ich habe schon sehr lange nicht mehr so oft Antikapitalister-Sprechchöre gehört wie in den letzten Monaten. Ja? Es ist natürlich eben noch von der Quantität her nicht so, wie wir es kennen aus alten Zeiten, ja? Aber die Qualität ist schon einmal sehr, sehr gut. Es gibt ein recht ein hohes Bewusstsein, und diese Themen, die werden eben in diesen Bewegungen wiedergespiegelt. Und ich glaube eben, man darf es nicht unterschätzen, man darf als Linke eben auch nicht verzweifeln, wenn wir merken, manche Dinge funktionieren nicht so einfach, sondern ich glaube, wir müssen Wege finden und Möglichkeiten, die wir haben, einfach möglichst gut nutzen. Und ich habe schon den Eindruck, eben irgendwie durch die Klimabewegung der letzten Jahre, durch viele Elemente, die wir erlebt haben, haben wir jetzt ein hohes Niveau erreicht, wo wir wirklich als Linke gut drin arbeiten können.
Thanks, Karin. So if anyone wants to make any contribution, you can raise your hand now. Tana? So if Tana while Tana speaks, anyone can raise his or her hand, and afterwards we will close the pool of contributions. Exactly.
Ja, also ich wollte mich auch erstmal bedanken nochmal, also sowohl für den super Vortrag von Andrzej als auch für die Übersetzung und alles und für die ganze Mühe, die ihr macht. Wir haben ja hier so ein internationalistisches Forum hier sozusagen aus verschiedenen Ländern. Finde ich echt auch so klasse. Und Genau, also viele Sachen sind ja schon gesagt worden und neue Aspekte habe ich jetzt eigentlich nicht, beziehungsweise eigentlich ist mir nur ein neuer oder ein weiterer Aspekt eingefallen und das ist, vielleicht müssen wir als Linke einfach unser Profil als revolutionäre Linke, als internationalistische Linke, unser Profil der Propaganda auch weiter schärfen, denke ich. In dem Sinne, weil der Ukraine-Krieg ja auch verschiedene weitere Fragen auch aufwirft, wie zum Beispiel die Frage des Faschismus. Wir haben ja jetzt 90 Jahre nach 33, Januar 33, der Machtergreifung, Übernahme oder wie auch immer das man nennt, von Hitler. Und es gibt viele Diskussionen im antifaschistischen Bereich, was jetzt Putin zum Beispiel betrifft. Ne? Weil Putin eben in Deutschland zum Beispiel die AfD auch direkt oder indirekt unterstützt hat, neigen jetzt halt sehr viele Leute dazu, zu sagen, Putin ist ein Faschist und haben dann den Schulterschluss mit der eigenen herrschenden Klasse sozusagen, die ja jetzt auch gegen Putin vorgeht dann, ne? Also so. Und ich denke, dass die antifaschistischen Kräfte gerade da etwas verwirrt sind, sage ich mal, in dieser Frage und dadurch auch geschwächt sind. Und das haben wir auch in verschiedenen Bereichen erlebt, wo es Proteste gegen die AfD gab, die dann auch zurückgegangen sind. Das ist sicher nicht der einzige Grund, warum Proteste geschwächt werden, aber es ist mit ein Grund. Und deswegen ist, denke ich, die Frage des Faschismus sogar mit da drin. Welchen Charakter, was ist überhaupt Faschismus? Ist Putin jetzt ein Faschist oder was ist überhaupt der Charakter des Faschismus? Diese Fragen müssten wir auch diskutieren und das hat auch irgendwie einen Zusammenhang mit diesem Krieg. Das ist mir noch eingefallen zusätzlich, wobei das vielleicht eine Nebenfrage ist oder eine Nebensache vielleicht, aber eigentlich trotzdem ganz wichtig letztendlich. Das wollte ich nur ergänzen und wollte mich nochmals bedanken.
Okay, thanks, Tanner. Now I wanted to make a contribution, or a little question, ask a little question. Yeah, like also in Germany, you also have like some anti-war protests, like sometimes, but the demonstrations which are bigger are those concerning like cost of living, inflation, and so on. So I think like a practical conclusion which we can draw is like to go to these protests, to those protests, to support those protests, but also to bring like the question of war into them by distributing leaflets, by getting to know people, talking to people, making the anti-war arguments. And from our experience, from at least my experience, like distributing such leaflets, you reach many people. Many people actually agree with you, like trade unionists, oftentimes trade unionists. So yeah, I also wanted to ask Andy if there are how big is like the cost of living movement or cost of living protests, how much are they present like in Poland, and if there's a chance to maybe intervene there exactly, or experiences concerning this development exactly. Next contribution will be from Ewald, so yeah, Andy, exactly.
Ja, das ist eine sehr gute Frage. That's a very important question from Angelo, and I said want the same question because there is in Germany it's a very important situation, because there are maybe in the next year there's in the in the state government, the people who work there, öffentlicher Dienst, name state in the state sector, the people who work in the state sector make so there's all year discussion about higher wages and against inflation and such things are in the next time. It's a very important conflict, I think so, and there maybe there are mobilization on the streets and at the workplaces, and it was very important for us and also for Poland, I think, or for Österreich, what goes on, yeah, and I think these two points are connected, and not in this way that the war is one thing, yeah, from the crisis, yeah, and I think the government makes these arguments in these conflicts, yeah. We have a war and such things. The great problems are put in, and not inflation, for example, and such things. And I think we must make good arguments, and also make a critic on to the union leader who make not this point. For us, it's very interesting that brings this point that one day later, after the strike, although from Ukraine weapons to Poland, they said no, we make no strike from the union leaders in Poland. It's very important thing, yeah. This was a very important information from you for us, yeah, because I think this hear nothing in the papers, yeah, about such point, such information, and I hope we can make this more to open that because there is this is the danger, yeah, and also the chances from the working class and from us is very is greater when we can make such points. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ewald, and thanks a lot to everyone who participated in the discussion. Now we will have some time in which Andy will respond to the final questions and yeah, like close the event with his words. Yeah.
Summing up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. I also want to thank Richard for the translation. It's good internationalist feel, as somebody said. I always like the story of how in the first revolutionary communist international, before it became Stalinized, they spoke, imagine this, after the First World War, meeting in Russia, speaking in German as an official language of the Communist International. I think that's a kind of tradition that we stand in. Okay, Yeah, the argument, yeah, what a brilliant argument that is. If we stop Putin with NATO arms, then that will stop imperialist invasions. Fantastic. Can you imagine, is that going to stop the tension building up between the United States and China? Is that going to stop? Just recently, the US press has been full of Iraq again. Iran again, where, for instance, New York Times said there's a new era of direct confrontation with Iran. Would that have stopped the invasion of Iraq? You know, because NATO sees itself as more powerful, so that all the NATO states are more powerful. So that's really going to stop future invasions. What they mean is, those people, I think, maybe not the ones who are fooled by the arguments, but the ones who launch the arguments, is they want to be the ones to do the invading. It's our right to invade. We decide where the human rights are, what, you know, obviously in terms of our propaganda, we decide which country has to be cut down to size, etc., etc. And that's what the argument really is. The demonstration, even a small voice is important. I don't want to give the impression that we shouldn't do that, because it's very important. Like, again, the First World War is a good example how it began with small voices, and the great Karl Liebknecht is a very good example of that. And also others, of course, but let's not go down the list. Yeah, I mean, the young people can be very open to arguments about capitalism today because of the climate change, because of war as well. It's not such an absurd argument. If you say system change, not climate change, you can say system change, not war. It's not a massive leap to show that it's the competition in capitalism that leads to these problems. And with Tanner made some very good points. I don't want to repeat them. I just agree with him. The same with Ewald. It's just the demonstration is important, because just there was a few extra strikes happening over the summer, strikes and protests. Sometimes they weren't even strikes, over the cost of living. Cost of living is about 17–18% in Poland officially, which obviously means that foodstuffs, I mean, we know energy prices as well, but foodstuffs massively more than that, you know, 2 or 3 times more expensive on certain things. So, you know, people are forced to think, well, we have to do something about it. So there's this kind of atmosphere of hostility to the government on that. They don't, you know, link anything to the war, but that's good in itself, is that hostility. And at the same time, this union leadership says, let's call off a national demonstration. It was going to take place, like I said, in Central Warsaw. It would have been a big change with their relationship with the government. And even though they would see it as allowing the pressure to you know, as a pressure valve to allow the pressure to evaporate into the air, so that workers would be satisfied with just a demonstration. I'm sure that's how they saw it. But even so, it would be important, because then people would come back into their workplaces. They would come back and talk about the demonstration and what we need to do, how to fight, and all the rest of it. So, I mean, basically, our politics, compared to, say, I talked about Razem in Poland, but there's obviously similar politics in other countries, which is dependent on being at the top of the state, we put our politics as independence of workers. You know, the nationalists talk about the sanctity of state independence. We talk about the sanctity, or, you know, the aim of creating independence of the working class, independence of the bosses, independence of the state bosses, independence of from the business bosses, so that they're completely, there's an independent politics that can look at questions like war, climate change, and obviously wages and conditions that are so crucial at the moment. And I think, you know, even though we're small in different cities and towns, etc., I mean, like Angelo said with this example of leafleting and things like that, I think we can have an impact that's much bigger than our numbers if the situation warrants it. And I think the situation does warrant it. I mean, we're not a big organization, but I think people know that we're on every kind of protest, every kind of demonstration that take place, whether it's a trade union one, or whether it's around climate change, or whether it's around the war. We're there to put forward our politics. Now, I don't know, is everybody here in Marx 21, just out of interest? Yeah, you're okay. So I don't have to do a join Marx 21 speech or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it is, I think it's, I've been a revolutionary for decades now, and I can't remember a time when the system really does look like it's completely can change, the situation can change very, very quickly in a matter of days or weeks. I've never known a time like that. I mean, the only time comparable was around 68, and that's in a kind of different context. Now you've got a whole number of different issues. Threat of nuclear war bigger than since 1962. Climate change, which wasn't such a big issue in that time. And again, the failure of capitalism to meet people's needs. It's a really exciting time. And you see that in young people on these demonstrations. There was a question about the cost of living demonstrations in Poland. There was one demonstration which was just a demonstration about everything. Some climate, some cost of living, there was even some farmers union people, and it was a real mishmash. And we of course took part in it. And of course the strikes and the protests themselves that are building in a number of countries. And I think whether the level is high or low.
Egal, ob das Bewegungslevel hoch oder tief ist, wir können es erwarten, dass es steigen wird in der Zukunft.
Because this awful situation for ordinary people right now, for ordinary workers. So it's actually a good time to be a revolutionary, because I mean, it's, you know, I'm not cheerful because of the horrors that are facing people, but it's an important time, maybe that's a better word, to be a revolutionary. And we really have to spread our influence as much as we can.